What's that? Venezuela on their Independence Day offers asylum to Edward Snowden. The U.S. does not like that. So things were looking up. Now they're looking down. And on July 19th, the Samantha Power episode happens. And I think it is something you're going to debate about for a little while. The Samantha Power episode happens. I will leave that there as we move to the next header, which is Samantha Power. As you may or may not know, the United States has been struggling for a long time to get the U.S. Senate to confirm someone affiliated with Obama to be the United States' representative to the United Nations. So we have been without a representative to the United Nations until the U.S. Senate confirms a new person. The person that the Obama administration has nominated and the person that will probably get the nomination is a woman named Susan Powell. Samantha Powell. Sorry, Susan Rice was the former one. All right. So, in order to get nominated, you got to impress the Senate. And a great way to impress the Senate is to say things about countries that the Senate doesn't like, that says that those countries are bad. So she says she's not down with Russia, Iran, Cuba, and Venezuela, and the way that they treat their citizens. They have a non-democratic society. I actually think his question was, did that occur to anyone that would anger people or ruin negotiations? I actually think that the U.S. was surprised that Venezuela acted as extremely as they did. Because after all, people in the United States all the time say rough things, and it tends to not be official policy of the United States. The problem was that the United States State Department, and for those of you that are learning how the government works, most of our foreign relations are handled through the U.S. State Department, came out and supported Power's remarks and backed them up. So it went from all the time a random member of Congress will be like, we hate Cuba. Cuba's like used to it, okay? All right? They are. No, they are. It's not even like a funny thing. Like, they get it, okay? I mean, honestly, how would the U.S. react if some Cuban official was like, the U.S. is the great evil? Like, they'd be like, okay, we're rooting for it. All right, you know? So, but the big deal, I think, wasn't just what Power said, but the fact that the State Department came out a day later and was like, thumbs up, we agree with it. They didn't say we agree with just the Venezuela part, okay? They just supported her. And that gave Maduro an opportunity to bash the United States. It is not a given that she'll get the nomination, but I'm informing you that I think that she will. And when she does, that will make it very difficult for the United States to work with Venezuela, especially in the United Nations, where she is our representative to the United Nations. You can read the card about what she said. It's below. The big deal isn't what she said. It's, did Venezuela say the kinds of things that turn the mean girl whisper into an irretrievable fight that's going to take a long time to fix? There are 11 things that Venezuela said in reaction to Power and the State Department's affirmation of Power. They get gradually uglier. Number one, take notes on these. Ms. Power's comments were interventionists. Okay. I don't know that they were. I didn't know that the U.S. was advocating intervening, but I can see that one. Number two, the United Nations has recognized Venezuela as having solid constitutional guarantees. So they intentionally picked the United Nations in their comment because that's where she's going to serve. Constitutional guarantees. They're like, hey, you want to say we violate human rights? The United Nations says we don't. Which is not 100% true, but they do have a system of constitutional guarantees. Third, this is a direct quote. By contrast, the whole world is constantly expressing concern over repressive practices carried out by the United States. Now it's getting ugly. So they shoot back at our human rights record. Fourth, sure, you don't need to have every word, okay? But by contrast, the whole world is constantly expressing its concern over repressive practices carried out by the United States. Or better put, you've accused us of being human rights violators. We're not. You are. Fourth, Venezuela complains about the illegal prison in Guantanamo Bay. Okay? Now they're shooting a little bit harder. Fifth, they complain about the United States killing of civilians by drone attacks. We're getting angrier.
All over the place.
Sixth, you know, grab a clear reference to the Zimmerman, Trayvon Martin. They say repression exists in the United States, where the United States kills African Americans with impunity. Now all that is going to anger the U.S. All that is going to anger the U.S. 7, the U.S. has unjustifiably persecuted Edward Snowden. Snowden experienced the most fierce repression for exercising his right to denounce U.S. practices, and that the United States violates the rights of privacy of all the world's people. We're straying a little bit, although we'll talk about that in a moment. 8, you can agree with several of these points. The point is that the United States government will not appreciate these being part of a Venezuelan press conference. 8, they've demanded an apology for the U.S. Good luck.
Wait, from the U.S.?
From the U.S., they demand an apology. Don't hold your breath. 9, this is crazy, all right? 9, they've agreed with Samantha Power that there are fascist parts of Venezuela and said that Samantha Power's comments are only helping those fascist elements. How? That's a clear move. I think that is the most interesting one of them all, because that clearly to me indicates that Maduro knows that he's in political trouble, that he won a very narrow election, and he's trying to use this anti-U.S. sentiment to protect himself politically, not just to make himself more popular, but specifically all the arguments about how there might be a military takeover in Venezuela. I think that that comment is very telling that he's worried about that. Number 10, who is behind the failed attempt to take over Venezuela? The U.S. imperialist government. He does this every now and again. He's like, the U.S. might have killed Chavez or poisoned Chavez. He says stuff that I think he knows to be a lie, but whatever. And then, in kind of the kicker, he says, Venezuela, in number 11, is increasingly interested in increasing relations with China. It's not going well. If you think Katie were in the argument last night, it's escalated. It's not good. It's not good. All right. Stay chill. All right. So let's synthesize what this means. All right, I'm going to pose a question to you that you don't have to answer immediately. All right, but I want you to think about it, and I'm going to take your vote in a second. The question is, do you think in the fall, let's say in your first tournament in September, do you think in the fall these arguments will be relevant and that the negative will win say no, or do you think that this will blow over come September? And I'll take your poll on that question in a moment. Okay, now, we don't really do enough emphasis on how research is found. We need to do more of that. I've given 2 sites that I think would be good sites over the course of the season for you to continually check out and recheck out so that you can get kind of good cards. One is this website called Venezuelan Analyst. I describe it and give the website there. Every time I've done research on Venezuela, those cards have been pretty good for the negative. And secondly, there's a dude named Stephen Lendman. There's a few cards from him below. That guy is an American, but writes really good cards for the neg. Doesn't seem to like the U.S. very much, and specifically not how the United States interacts with Venezuela. Those are 2 sites that I might get a Google alert on and get some updates from over the course of the season if I wanted to stay up to date on Venezuelan affairs. Before we go to the card section, you can create your own set of notes. Here are some things that I think will matter in the short run. All right, number 1. It will be very hard for Maduro in the short run to publicly say yes to an offer from the United States. He's kind of gone too far down the path. It'll be hard. Number 2, if I were affirmative, I would emphasize that this does not mean that Maduro has to say no to private offers from the United States. Most actions that the U.S. does that are controversial with other countries are intentionally done in something called quiet diplomacy. Quiet diplomacy. It doesn't mean they get in a room and talk soft. Okay? It means that they intentionally remove themselves from the media and make arrangements that are not announced publicly. The most famous topic-specific example of quiet diplomacy came in the Cuban Missile Crisis. Yeah, right on. So here's the agreement. Kennedy made it look like the United States made an agreement where the Soviet Union in the 60s would not send nuclear weapons to Cuba. And in exchange, the public diplomacy said, however, we will agree to not invade Cuba. However, privately, the arrangement was different. Privately, the arrangement was the United States would stop being aggressive and use fewer nuclear weapons in Turkey. So Kennedy didn't want to be seen publicly as making that arrangement. So it was done quietly and not announced to the media. And I think there is a hope for the affirmative to argue that normal means is quiet diplomacy, that Maduro has made his own bet, and frankly, in the wake of these comments, Obama couldn't publicly do something nice to Venezuela now, but that privately there could be a quid pro quo or just some sort of exchange, and that that's more workable. Third, any public action will link very hard to U.S. politics and even more so to Venezuelan politics. Truth be told, a bunch of Republicans and several liberal Democrats would get mad at Obama if he was nice to Venezuela. Okay? But truth be told, Maduro, if he did something really nice and publicly backed down to the U.S., he might really get booted out of office, and not in a nice way. Okay? So I think that is the short term on that question. Fourth, all of the old levers haven't changed. It's still fundamentally the case that we're going to have a relationship with Venezuela. That the United States will still have leverage in the form of being the #1 export economy for Venezuela, specifically on oil. And Venezuela will still have leverage because the United States loves oil. So no matter how mean girls we are, we still have that fundamental portion and leverage on both sides of the equation. Now, let's look at some of the cards that are at play. The say no cards, I'm not going to read them out loud for you. I will say the best of them is from El Universal, which is a very, very prominent newspaper in Caracas that I encourage you to read. It also has an English language version that makes it very convenient to cut cards from. And it's not totally biased. So I encourage you to look at that during the course of the season. Those cards basically are pretty good at saying, they'll probably say no. There's a little bit of alignment in there, etc. Let's talk a little bit about Snowden. Some of the best evidence I read and worked with the Hoyas Party scholars when I was in Georgetown was, yes, Latin American pink regimes want to be seen as offering Snowden asylum. No, they don't really want him to come. Why don't they really want, why are they afraid to actually have him arrive? Go ahead, right here. Go ahead.
Because the U.S. is going to be really pissed.
The U.S. is going to be really pissed. Well said. You have a different answer?
I was going to say the same.
Yeah. All right. It's bad when the U.S. offers, when Venezuela or Bolivia offers asylum. It's real bad when Snowden winds up in Venezuela. All right? There's an interesting and I find humorous card that I am going to read an excerpt from Free Venezuela, which sounds like an awful sight, but actually the person, if you read their internal qualification, is quite qualified. Maduro offered Snowden asylum, but is he serious? No government in the region is really eager to see Snowden land in its country. None of the countries that have offered Snowden asylum have said that they would be willing to go fetch him. Wilson, who is the guy that's lived in Venezuela for 21 years, writing for a U.S. magazine, provides a welcome reality check on life in Venezuela for Snowden and his supporters on the left. And before I continue reading the card, there's great evidence, and I'm going to show you in a moment, that I think if I ran the cap game, I would run to say that capitalism is sort of not infected Venezuela and that their socialist movements in Venezuela are doing well. And this card's a pretty good rebuttal if I was against the Venezuela-specific cap game. The economy in Venezuela is gutted. Today, while walking in my neighborhood, I saw lines of people stretching out of a government-owned supermarket. They were waiting to buy cooking oil, sugar, chicken, simple staple foods. Food shortages are common. Pack a comfortable pair of shoes, Snowden, if you would want to buy coffee, meat, flour, cornmeal, or pasta. Buy a health insurance policy. Although the government and Sean Penn, American actor, like to claim that Venezuelans all have access to free health care, that's a farce. At the health clinic in my village outside Caracas, the sick are advised to bring their own thermometers. The clinic doesn't have any. Medications? Forget about it. They have none. The hospitals are even worse. One of my friends broke his legs in 2 places. The doctors told us that his leg would have to be reset with pins. The hospital had no pins. We would have to buy them at a hefty sum in Caracas. It's true that many Venezuelans here admire you, Mr. Snowden, for blowing the whistle on U.S. espionage programs, but think twice before pulling a stunt like that here. You'll do fine down here, Senor Snowden, and Venezuelans support your crusade. But many more here will wonder why you ever would want to come to a country that constantly violates the very principles that you're fighting for. I think it is an interesting time to read about Venezuela academically. I don't know if the great affirmative and negative arguments are out there yet, but I find editorials like that to be moving and powerful. Go ahead.
But can you say that would be true of pretty much any Latin America or South American countries offering Snowden asylum?
Well, I think any Latin American or South American country that's offering asylum to Snowden may not have the living standards that he's accustomed to in the United States before he did all this, but I'm not really sure what that means. No, not all of them violate human rights. I think that things are pretty rough in parts of Venezuela, to be honest. I'm not suggesting it would be a walk in the park to live in Nicaragua, okay? But, you know, the truth of the matter is that Snowden is probably going to need to go somewhere other than the food court at the Russian airport, all right? And the countries that are interested in taking him are not going to be friends of the U.S. and therefore might not have the same democratic principles that the United States subscribes to. All right. There's a great card that Snowden was not offered asylum because Maduro's politics were in bad shape. And this card does a great job of defending how the Cuban economy or the Venezuelan economy is good. A different version of it from the person named Ryan Mallet Ottram continues on the next page and is the best card I've seen at defending some of the specific socialist endeavors that Venezuela has taken over the last 10 years. I think it could be integrated into the campaign if you were debating negative against the Venezuela affirmative. There's some pretty good cards which indict Roger Noriega, the best friend of the affirmative, on the Venezuela-Iran arguments and say that he is part of the hawks. The hawks are kind of the people in the United States federal government that constantly think that there are dangerous military situations on the horizon. I think that card is very strong at sort of defending that Venezuela and Iran aren't a big mutual threat, and I thought both those pieces of evidence were pretty solid. So to give a quick update on kind of a few other items, just to make sure you take notes on them. Snowden, unless something changed since I walked up here from Afterlab, still stuck in Russia, unclear where he's going to wind up. If I had to bet, I would bet he will not wind up in Venezuela. If I had to bet, I would bet that there is an online website which offers odds that you can look up, even bet on where he'll wind up. If you want my honest opinion, Snowden's going to wind up sooner or later in U.S. custody. That's where he's going to wind up. Okay? Maybe not immediately, but sooner or later. I think he really angered people in the United States. Also to update Venezuela and Iran, there are some very powerful studies that the affirmative cites that Iran is supporting terrorism through Venezuela in U.S. soil or in the United States sort of sphere of influence. And I think the evidence which is coming out against that is getting stronger and stronger. For those of you that were in D.C., we met with a guy that was pretty much in charge of the U.S. sanctions regime as it related to Iran, and he said there was almost nothing to the affirmative claim that Venezuela was being used as a mechanism to kind of foster an anti-U.S. agenda through Iran. I think that argument is starting to trend more and more negative the more that we learn about it. Okay, backing it up. You now have an opportunity to raise your hand. It is September, it's Labor Day. It's early September. And you have to go into a debate. Do the events of Samantha Power and the immediate aftermath of Samantha Power mean that the affirmative cannot solve and Venezuela will likely still be saying no come September? Raise your hand if you think yes, they'll reject. Okay? Who thinks that this will blow over by September? Okay. I think that this is pretty bad, but I think it'll blow over by September, to be honest. I'm not sure, but I think it will. Okay. If you have individual questions for me, I'll feel free to take them. If not, you don't have to check 11.